And now, your feature presentation.
Welcome back to another Untitled movie review. I am one of your hosts, Matt Rohrbeck. Alongside, he's allergic to tomatoes, but he is tomato meter approved, Eric Marchin.
Matt, it's the end of the world as Adam McKay knows it, and we're fine. We're fine here.
A nice Canadian.
All is fine.
It's a bare naked ladies reference.
Well, it was also a reference to Dr. Strangelove.
Oh,
Peter
yeah.
Sellers is on the phone and he's saying, we're fine here. How are you? Well, that's fine. It's all good. It's good stuff.
Today we are reviewing Adam McKay's Don't Look Up, starring Leonardo DiCaprio, Jennifer Lawrence, I gotta take a deep breath here, Rob Morgan, Jonah Hill, Mark Rylance, Tyler Perry, Timothée Chalamet, Ron Perlman, Ariana Grande, Kid Cudi, also known as Scott Mescudi, Himesh Patel, Melanie, Lynskey, Cate Blanchett, Meryl Streep, and even more. It will be released on December 24th on Netflix, but it is now playing in select cinemas. Tiff Bell Lightbox here in Toronto. It's also playing, I think, like Whippy Landmark Cinemas and
Shout out to
like
the Durham
that.
region.
So there's some multiplexes that are, that's showing you how much things have changed in 2021. But Eric, how are you doing?
I'm good.
We just recorded a great episode of the Untitled Movie Podcast, which everyone can go check out, which we do talk a little bit about Don't Look Up because it was nominated for multiple Critics' Choice Awards. And Eric and I broke down all the nominees and all the kind of what we put up for nomination, what was actually nominated, what our thoughts were on everything. So everyone go check out the 108th episode or
find out how many nominations Bergman Island got.
Yeah. But let's get into it, dude. Don't Look Up. We saw this a couple weeks ago now at the Lightbox.
We sure did.
Adam McKay's kind of biting, blunt satire on global warming. But you can kick it off. What is Don't Look Up, Eric?
Well, Matt, as I said in my review, as I said to you after watching the film, you teed it up perfectly. Adam McKay's latest mockbuster satire is about as subtle as a planet-killing comet destined for Earth, and its impact is going to happen in less than 6 months. It sort of follows the point of view, or at least it starts from the point of view of two scientists played by Leonardo DiCaprio and Jennifer Lawrence, who discover this comet and notify NASA and bring in Rob Morgan's character. They alert the president and end up going to the White House, where a sort of a bureaucratic conversation ensues, where Meryl Streep's Trumpian-esque president and her son, played by Jonah Hill, seem to be uninterested in what they're saying and looking at it from the point of view of an economic stance, in that they feel that, like, okay, all they're asking for is money, and this isn't really as important as sort of, the kind of ins and outs of being an insider in the political status of the White House. And from there, Leonardo DiCaprio and Jennifer Lawrence's characters go on this media tour to try to get the public's attention about this comet that is destined for Earth. And specifically, DiCaprio's character begins tracking well as this kind of science pundit, especially when they trim his beard. And it's sort of the ins and outs of both climate change deniers and the satire that exists within our world, but also the idea of how the media is more interested in sort of the superficial sort of aspects of life, whether it be which celebrity broke up with who, or what is going to be happening on the next episode of a certain show. And to be honest, Matt, the more I think about this film, the less I like it. And it's not because I don't agree with what Adam McKay is saying, because I think what he is saying is very true. It's a very pessimistic movie as well. Like it's a very dark film, especially in that last act. But I feel
tonally strange, being a comedy, but also very depressing.
Yes. But I also think that it is so self-righteous and superficial on how it's saying what it's presenting. And McKay at this point in his career, I do kind of feel is a little bit high on his own supply, where he believes in his own sort of reverence of what he's creating. And what I loved about, his movies like Anchorman and Talladega
Step
Nights
Brothers.
and the other guys, is that there were interjections and social commentary on sexism and white collar crime and those things. And
But they were
there.
first and foremost a silly comedy,
Yes,
right?
they were absurdist, they were irreverent, they were funny, but they did have those things in there, and it wasn't sort of hitting you over the head over and over and over again, to the point where I just found it completely obnoxious.
Yeah, and I understand that, but it completely worked for me. And I think its bluntness is sometimes, I don't think subtlety really is necessary in this movie, and I don't think it's needed in the movie. When I think sometimes an asteroid to the face is essentially kind of what we need. And I do agree with you in a sense where I'm not quite sure who this movie is for, because I do think, like, I enjoyed it thoroughly. I think it's very funny. It's very depressing. I think its blunt social commentary is very on the nose. It is very heavy handed, but I think sometimes when you look at what's going on, like, truth is stranger than fiction sometimes. And then when you put it in a movie like this, it almost seems absurd and too obvious and, a little self-righteous. And it is all of those things, but I feel like, you know what, fuck it, sometimes that's what we need. And I feel like that completely worked for me in this movie, where I did laugh consistently. I do like, the allegory of global warming and using something so obvious as an asteroid coming to Earth, that is very clearly coming to Earth to kill everyone, but no one wants to believe it, or no one wants to pay attention to it, or just ignore it, and things like that. I like that. It is obvious. It is a little bit up its own ass. And I like him kind of poking fun at all of that kind of stuff. But I do struggle with going, okay, you know, the people he's making fun of in this movie are going to be pissed off at it, because he's, whether it's, right leaning people or just, deniers in general of things, is like, it's very blunt in its stance on those people. But then I think the people on the other side of things who he kind of wants on his side are going to kind of be what you're saying, whether it's critics or just people in general, kind of rolling their eyes at it, because they're like, I'm smarter than what you're presenting here. I know these things that you're saying. You're kind of saying it in this kind of self-righteous way, or this very obvious way, and they'll kind of roll their eyes at it, which is ultimately, you look at the reviews it's getting mixed reviews, even though it's showing up in awards places like Critics' Choice and things like that. And I know that's not the movie per se, that's talking about how people are perceiving the movie, but I feel like this movie is talking about how people perceive things. And I don't know. It worked for me. I love Leo. I love Jennifer Lawrence in this movie. I like Leonardo DiCaprio in more of a comedy. And I know he's done, there's comedy in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. There's,
It's
comedy
very self-deprecating.
Yes. And I just really dig that, where I kind of view this movie as Anchorman with more of a blunt social political message to it, where I'm not taking it too seriously. And I like how ridiculous it is, because that's the McKay that I do like. I agree with you that those kind of movies that if you go back and watch them, and he's always one of those guys where I feel like the first time I see his movies, they don't land with me. And then the more I watch them, the more I love them, at least with those ridiculous comedies. And I feel like this movie is ridiculous. It's over the top. It's in your face. It's stupid. It's not necessarily smart, but it kind of is smart. And I'm just having trouble like putting my thumb on the movie, but I know that I really, really enjoyed it thoroughly. And I feel like that asteroid to the face is sometimes what's needed for people to go, huh? And I don't think me or you are in that category. I think we kind of, again, we're people who do believe in global warming and what's happening and know about a lot of this stuff. So I feel like that can kind of go the other way, which you'll elaborate on more. But I just thought the cast was thoroughly enjoyable, and I thought it was really, really funny. And I like the message that it's presenting, even if it is, a sledgehammer or an asteroid to the face. Like, I liked the bluntness of it. It was unapologetic, and I think he kind of knows what he's presenting and in the way that he's presenting it. So I don't think it's trying to hide its bluntness or anything like that. So I agree with you that is some subtlety maybe needed. I don't know. I feel like, yeah, you can, it's not one of those movies where I feel like from the bat, he's like, this is what this is. It's going to be what's happening in this movie is how I'm going to present it to you as well. And I kind of appreciate it for that. And I really liked it.
Yeah, I mean, okay. I don't think I'm smarter than this movie in terms of like what it has to say. I'm just looking at it from the point of view of I wish it was a little bit clever with how it was approaching the subject matter and how it was presenting it, because the other thing that I don't like about this kind of newer Adam McKay is his editing can be as bombastic and over the top and just again just obnoxious, where it's continually quick cutting and just being everywhere. It's so erratic that you're just like, just take a deep breath for a second and like, let's not have even the editing perpetuate what the Leonardo DiCaprio character is feeling. Like I get, you know, like he is a guy that is very much against what DiCaprio is, you know, in the public eye. But then again, also, I mean, the casting is on the nose as well, because DiCaprio is very much an environmentalist and somebody that has always been sort of an advocate for, you know, endangered species and, you know, what we're doing to you know, the environment as a whole and the ice caps and things like that. So like even that casting is kind of like, okay, like I get why they put him in the role, and I do like the idea of him playing sort of more self-deprecating comedic parts. I think Once Upon a Time in Hollywood maybe opened him up a little bit more to that, and this kind of follows suit. And I don't mind him in this movie. I think one of the funniest things that also kind of connects this movie to the other guys is when he goes on that first media tour, and when they're kind of like trimming his beard, and then they find out that like it's like, oh, actually you're kind of handsome.
Yeah.
And I think that's funny, because the reason why it also reminded me of the other guys is because every time Will Ferrell and Mark Wahlberg are going out on a case,
And
there's
everyone
always
thinks-
an attractive woman who's lusting after Will Ferrell, and Mark
Yeah.
Wahlberg's character never gets it. And it's
Yeah.
almost like an inverse version of that, which I actually
Yeah.
do think is really
It's
funny.
very funny. Yeah.
And then there's another, and that's also a very subtle joke. I think that that's one of the few subtle kind of jokes that they do play up quite well. And
Yeah.
then the other joke that I do like that's an ongoing joke is you have Paul Guilfoyle, who's probably best known for CSI, playing one of these military guys.
Generals.
Yeah, and he literally sells these snacks to DiCaprio, Lawrence, and Rob Morgan's characters, and then you find out that they were actually free. And then they're trying to like break down the psychosis of like, why would he do this? And it's like this ongoing joke.
It's
that
one of the
actually
most
is
ridiculous
funny.
throwaway kind of things that is genuinely funny. And I don't know. I just felt like there were a lot of those moments throughout where I was laughing kind of consistently, whether it's from the supporting cast or from the two leads. And like, I really like Timothée Chalamet in this. Like it kind of reminds me of, I liked him in Lady Bird in that small role. And then seeing him pop up here as Yule, this kind of like skater, kind of punk kid, like not like punk, but also redneck kind of guy,
And spiritual
just
as
like,
well. Like
yes,
he's
and then
kind of a born
religious and
again
like,
Christian evangelist type who kind of like came to religion on his own, and he doesn't even come into like, this cast is so huge and he doesn't even come into the film
to the third act,
third act. And then like the other thing as well, that like it might not be the movie's fault, but you're very self-aware of like, okay, you have a scene between Jonah Hill and Leonardo DiCaprio, and both of them have been in The Wolf of Wall Street, which is a much better satirical sort of
I agree with
farce.
that. Yeah,
and then you also have like Cate Blanchett and Leonardo DiCaprio who have worked together on The Aviator. So two Scorsese pairings there in one film. And then you're thinking like as well, like the way that this movie kind of introduces cast members, like we haven't even talked about Mark Rylance,
who's essentially doing his Ready Player One character just over again, which is incredible.
And I think he's okay. I just think that Mark Rylance is one of those guys where like if he's truly engaged by the material, you'll get a really kind of like solid performance from him, whether it be Dunkirk or Bridge of Spies or,
Yeah.
Intimacy, for those who have seen the NC-17 film from the early 2000s that would always play on Showcase for Canadians watching this. But then with Ready Player One or this, it's almost like he reads the materials like, okay, I guess I'm just gonna literally phone this in as
And I'm
this
going to
kind
do
of,
the same thing I just did.
yeah,
Like,
this tech
but
magnate,
yeah,
and you're just thinking to yourself, like, and the epilogue in this as well, I think is terrible. I think the
I will
last,
not disagree with you there. I think it undercuts the ending immensely.
and I
And
didn't
I
like
feel
Ron
like,
Perlman either as this politically incorrect astronaut who's kind of being sort of framed as the hero. I like Ron Perlman, but and it's also funny because Cate Blanchett and Ron Perlman are also in Nightmare Alley, which we'll be talking about as
yeah.
well. So there's a lot of crossover with that stuff, but I
And
just
that's kind
think,
of poking fun at Armageddon and those kind of,
yeah, Michael Bay movies
yeah,
in general, or specifically that sort of doomsday movie of the 90s
yeah.
where it's so
The
like
raw America saves the day. Yeah.
Armageddon is a terrible movie as well, and Deep Impact's not great, but I think it's more interesting in terms of how it projects, like how people would react to the end of the world and what the government would do in a situation like that. But it is mocking that, but I just wanted it to be a little bit more clever,
Sure.
and not maybe thinking that it was smarter than it actually is.
Where I don't think it is, dude. That's where I maybe disagree with you. Where I don't necessarily think it thinks it's smarter than what it is. Like I just feel like Adam McKay and the co-writer David Sirota, like I feel like they knew exactly, like it is dumbed down. Like it is dumbed down to the 100th degree to me, where I'm like, I think it's presented in that way intentionally, and it's kind of in itself like poking fun at itself for that. And I don't know. I always saw it as, I know that this is what this is. And I know that we're dumbing this down, and I know it's so on the nose, and I know it's presented in that way, where I don't think it ever was trying to be smarter than what it is. And I present it as a kind of a movie for, like, I don't want to say I'll I'll go back on that. But
But
like
to your
I
but to your
just
point though, you made this point earlier. It's like, who is this movie
yeah, and
for?
I don't, and I stand by that thing. Like I enjoyed it, and I think there will be people who buy into it and kind
Oh,
of come
clearly
at
there
it.
are. Yeah.
Yeah, and come at it from the angle that I'm coming at. But I think when you talk about a general public, when this drops on Netflix, or when, people who are going to see it in cinemas now that aren't like, movie people, because I feel like by this point, after Vice and after The Big Short, I feel like some people have already made up their mind on Adam McKay, and I'm not saying you're in that group because you actually liked Vice and I think The Big Short to an extent.
Yeah, I think they're
Yeah.
better movies than this. Yeah.
And I don't know how I feel in all of those, but I liked all three of them. But I know that there are going to be people who are already think McKay's obnoxious after those two movies and aren't
Well, if
going to
they
buy
know
into
who he
this.
is, because I
Yeah,
think the big selling point for this movie for people that just go to the theaters every once in a while,
it's from the
especially
director
right
of
now.
Anchorman and Step Brothers.
Well, no,
Or
not
no?
even that. It's you have Jennifer Lawrence and
Sure,
Leonardo
and Leonardo, yeah,
DiCaprio in this huge ensemble piece,
with
and like
all these
even their
actors.
characters, like there's one moment in this movie that felt real to me, and that's the scene where Melanie Lynskey, who plays DiCaprio's wife, confronts DiCaprio and Cate Blanchett's characters who are having an affair, and she throws all these pills at him. I think that one moment could have been even more over the top, but the way that Lynskey plays it, on top of kind of showing you that the DiCaprio character, again, self-effacing, and also somebody who has anxiety issues and depression and is sort of trying to
Mhm.
take a number of pills to kind of balance that. It showed DiCaprio's character, Dr. Randall Mindy, in a moment of true vulnerability that I hadn't seen in a DiCaprio performance before, but that's coming more from Lynskey's delivery of that
Mhm.
moment of heartbreak and betrayal and anger, and I think that works. And then also, it's just weird. Not that this is a criticism towards the movie, but seeing DiCaprio have two grown children is kind
It's
of
funny.
weird to
Yeah,
me.
yeah. Never gonna happen. Yeah, and I think that goes back to the tone problems of the movie, right? Like I think, it almost it doesn't it goes back to that point where I'm like, I don't know if it knows who it's for. Where I feel like, to me, I view it kind of like, what if we made an Anchorman style movie with a message, but a prestige cast instead of just pure, comedic actors.
Well, because Will Ferrell's not talking to Adam McKay
Yeah.
anymore.
And I go, okay, that's an interesting idea to me. How would that work? And I feel like it's at times so over the top and very funny, but then at times wants to be, drive home its message and be dramatic. And I feel like those two things are fighting and clashing with one another. And ultimately, I like that because I like its bluntness, like I keep repeating, and I like that it's weird in a sense where it is Anchorman with a prestige cast that's driving home this very blunt and obvious message. But then I look at the audience who are going to go see this, and it goes back to my original point of like the people that it's making fun of are going to go fuck this guy, making fun of us for these things. And then the other side, I feel like are going to kind of poo-poo McKay being like, I'm smarter than you, I'm smarter than this, like this is too obvious and blunt, and kind of roll your eyes that it's up its own ass, or any of those things. So that's what I think the movie is struggling with. And I feel like it never quite, even though I really enjoyed it, never quite lands that tricky kind of tightrope that it's walking. And like, I don't know. Like I'm curious to see the reaction from a general public, because I think people will be lured in by the cast and things like that. But I don't know. I really liked it. I will say, my stance on Meryl Streep. I think she's a little weirdly miscast.
Well, it's
in that
gimmicky
role.
too, right? Because again, like
Yeah.
DiCaprio being an environmentalist in real life, it's on the nose, where it's like,
Streep
you
is
know,
such
Meryl Streep's
yeah,
a liberal to the
a
ninth
great
degree.
person.
Yeah, a decent. Well, yeah, she's a decent person, and obviously acting wise, like that's aside, but like
Sure.
it's like, okay, the joke is we're trying to cast her against type, and she's playing this kind of like almost Hillary Clinton but as a Trump like figure
Yeah.
who has a photo of Steven Seagal and her on her desk,
I
and like
laughed at
that's
that.
the joke. And like,
Yeah.
I actually don't mind Jonah Hill. I think he
Yeah.
actually is funny in most things he's in, and here he's actually has some good one liners, and is actually also again very he can be sort of corrosive in sort of how he attacks both Lawrence and
I think he
DiCaprio.
knows what movies he's in more than
Well, I think
anyone.
I do think this though. I think this movie. I think most of the cast and McKay are on the same page
Yeah, yeah.
compared to something like, say, House of Gucci, where House of Gucci was like
Yes, I
everybody
agree
was
with
all
that.
over the place, and Ridley Scott is maybe not the best filmmaker for that kind of satire. Where at least I think the people that are in this movie and the people behind the scenes knew the film that they were making, but I think also the editing does a lot of the heavy lifting in terms of kind of making it even more sort of gonzo in its overall direction. But I disagree with you with like, I think McKay does have this superiority complex where he is looking down. I mean, he is the co-writer and the director, and he is kind of
Mhm.
looking down at this whole situation and being like, look how
Fucking
ridiculous
dumb you are.
everybody
Yeah,
is. Like
yeah.
even my scientists, who get lured into, especially DiCaprio, who at first is very polite and
And then
meek
gets
and
caught up in the
in his own bullshit, right?
yeah.
And like the way that like Lawrence's character is also like, this punk rock scientist who's working on her PhD, and like her kind of like trying to make the point come across, and all she gets back is sort of she's in this cycle of memification, and ends up being sort of categorized as histrionic, when like that's the obvious thing when women are trying to make a point, like they're categorized in that group of being like, oh, you're being
They name the
hysterical.
asteroid after her, and
Yeah.
then DiCaprio takes all the credit, even though she was the one who discovered it. And you even see like I think some of the more subtle things is, I mean, that's very on the nose and very obvious too. But like I even in some of the, as DiCaprio takes more of the spotlight, like I thought that kind of was an interesting kind of commentary, even again, very blunt, very in your face. But the movie is throwing a lot at you too, right? Where ultimately it is about, global warming and that crisis and things like that in a very blunt metaphor, but it is throwing, like you said, you mentioned social media, just the media in general, regular media. There's so much being thrown at you throughout this entire movie that I think that's where it kind of maybe gets muddled a bit, and then doesn't completely work. But overall, yeah, I don't know. I just thought it was an enjoyable comedy with like a ridiculous premise that is essentially kind of worked for me. And I'm going to give the movie I don't know if there's anything else we didn't cover. Nicholas Britell's score, which we did talk a little bit about on Critics' Choice nominations. I was like, I remember when his name popped up at the end, and I was like, huh, I didn't really even think about the music in this movie while listening or
Well,
while
the
watching
song is probably
It's
the
like,
kind of the biggest
yes,
feature in terms of
with
music
Kid
with
Cudi and
Grande.
Ariana Grande. Yeah. And yeah, you have a ton of other people. Himesh Patel showing up, Michael Chiklis. We mentioned Chalamet, Tyler Perry. Rylance is ridiculous, and there's some other cameos in there. Just absolutely ridiculous cast. But yeah, I totally, I'm not like over the moon about the movie, but I do really, really like it. I'm gonna give it a 4 out of 5.
I am going to give it a 2 out of 5 and recommend that people rewatch Anchorman or the other guys or the films that it's trying to emulate, which are films like Network or Doctor Strangelove. And again, I still like Adam McKay. He's one of those guys where I think I like him more as a personality or more as just a person in general.
As Dirty Mike.
Dirty Mike and the Boys. Than I do an actual filmmaker or a filmmaker now. I just think that like he's kind of, again, I mentioned it, gotten a little high on his own supply.
I don't disagree with that. As much as I really liked Big Short, Vice, and Don't Look Up, do I miss the other guys, Step Brothers, Talladega Nights, Anchorman, Adam McKay? I absolutely do. And I think this, for me, again, I look at it even more so than Vice and Big Short, which I feel like we're trying to be, just straight prestige movies. I see this mostly as a weird combo of that earlier stuff and those two movies, and a clash of those, which I don't think completely works, but then worked for me if I view it that way. So,
but then his series that he's producing and he directs episodes of with Succession and what looks like it's going to be another winning season with the Lakers dynasty series coming up,
which is the reason Will Ferrell hates.
Yeah. They're actually, at least Succession is actually good. Like it's like really addictive television. And I almost feel that he was also working on Parasite too, right? Like
I think he still is. He's developing that as well. And like, yeah, no, I still like, I'll always be intrigued with a new Adam McKay movie. I'll be curious if he ever gets back to those more pure comedies or if he'll always be kind of in this prestige comedy message movie kind of thing. It'll be interesting to see where he goes, but yeah,
well,
I'm excited for
he already, I mean, they already announced, and he had been working on it for a while. But Bad Blood is the next movie he's making that Apple just picked up,
also with
Jennifer Lawrence, which is about Elizabeth Holmes, who basically created this this kit that was fake, that could like detect whether or not you had diabetes and other diseases. And again, like that feels like it's going to be in that same kind of zone as everything we've watched since The Big Short.
I would just love for him to do another Other Guys or something like that, right? Like even if I would love if he went back and forth. Like,
right.
Give us one of those, but maybe, and that goes back to your point of maybe he thinks he's also above that now, right? Like he's better than those kind of movies, which is maybe what happened with him and Will Ferrell too, right? Like this is all stuff outside of the review, but it is fascinating to see his career and where it's gone. And I remember even when Big Short got all those nominations and Vice as well, it's just like, it's like Adam McKay, interesting. Okay.
Well, that always happens though, when like,
yeah.
I mean, we talked about that with Peter Farrelly, right?
Yeah,
like with Green Book and things like that, where it's like you have a filmmaker who does something that's maybe outside the norm, and it does kind of, I mean, this isn't accessible the way that Green Book was, or maybe even The Big Short, because The Big Short talked about, again, white collar crime and sort of what happened after 2008 and how all of that happened with the stock market. But I think he's a very smart man. I think he is a funny guy. I just think that he's becoming more and more pompous, and that is showing in his films, where it's not necessarily I want him to even regress. I just want him to find, I was kind of hoping it worked more for you. And you're saying like there was this kind of nice kind of, balance or crossroads between,
the two
his earlier
styles.
and
Yeah.
I want that to work better. I think he can make it work. I just don't think it does here.
Fair. Well, thank you all for listening. Let us know what you think about Don't Look Up. We've opened the comments back up on YouTube. Please be nice to us.
God, really?
Please be nice
no.
to us. We'll see how long that lasts, but we have tons of other content we would love for you guys to check out. We have reviews coming up for, I've lost my notes here. Where are my notes? Here we go. Benedetta, Spider-Man Far From Home, The Kingsman, The Lost Daughter, Nightmare Alley, Red Rocket, Being a Ricardo's, Licorice Pizza, Tragedy of Macbeth, Matrix, Tender Bar, and more.
And so much more.
So keep it locked right here on Untitled Movie Reviews on YouTube, podcast services. Our newest episode of the Untitled Movie Podcast, where we cover all of the Critics' Choice Award nominees, is up. So go check that out as well. And we'll have a conversation, Spider-Man Far From Home spoiler cast for you guys. So we'll have a spoiler-free review, which should be up on Tuesday the 14th. And then we'll have a spoiler cast. I might even drop it right on Friday, because that's, when people are going to be seeing it Thursday night, and you want to be part of that conversation. So very, very excited to talk about that. Thank you all for your support. One-stop shop over on Letterboxd. Just go there, Untitled_movies. All of the links to everything we do is over there. That's the easiest place to go find us. As always, my name is Matt Rohrbeck. You can find more of my work around the internet, but mostly at UntitledMoviePodcast.com. And you can follow me on all the social medias at Matt Rohrbeck.
And I'm Dirty Mike. You can follow my film reviews at RogersTV.com/CinemaScene and on the social medias at EM6211.
Until next time.
Don't go chasing waterfalls.